City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli, and on today's episode of The Fog of War and Humanity here on HMTV, my special guest is Mayor of Shoreham Village, Tom Spier, will join me for a conversation about his 4 decades of service as a lawyer, his love for military history, and the astounding peace and wartime helmet collection that he has collected for several decades here. It's good to be back for a busy couple of weeks. We have a great podcast for you today. And Tommy, here we go. Let's get started. Where did you grow up as a kid, and what were your interests?
I grew up in Port Washington and then Shoreham, Long Island. Went from 8th grade through high school in Shoreham. I was always interested in military history. I played tennis in high school. Wasn't really an athletic guy. It was basically growing up. Always liked cars.
Okay. So we're up here in Glen Cove now at the Holocaust Museum. How long did you live up in Port Washington for?
Until 1975, from about 1961 when I was born up until 75.
Okay. And then you moved out to Shoreham. Was there many differences that you saw in Shoreham compared to here?
It was a lot more rural than Port Washington at the time. 25A was one way in each direction. Now it's two lanes in each direction. Just a lot more crowding. Shoreham Village was a summer community.
And where did you end up graduating high school from?
Shoreham Wading River.
Wow, so you were one of the first.
Yeah, I'm the first class that went all the way through.
Okay.
It was sort of fun going back to Shoreham because my mom's grandparents both summered in Shoreham in the teens and 20s. In fact, my great-grandfather was the first mayor, then called the president of the corporation. So I'm a legacy.
Wow.
Like Flounder in Animal House.
That's not a bad legacy, though, you know. So now you go out there, right? You actually saw like almost the development of Loco itself in terms of the nuclear plant.
We used to go clamming down there by the jetty, or by the end of Creek Road. So I remember when it was completely vacant, and then they started putting in the nuke.
And that surprised a lot of people, right, in the community?
Yep.
And it's still there today, right?
Beautiful sight.
Yeah. So now you graduate from Shoreham, Wading River. You're one of the first classes there. Where do you end up?
I went to Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, double majored in history and business administration, took a year off, worked in Manhattan as a intern at Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, then ended up working for a water company it was in Shorewood Water Company.
Okay.
Painting hydrants, Maine. It was an interesting time. I met a lot of great guys, and I went to law school the next year out in Ohio.
Okay. Now, to get back to Gettysburg, was there any one part of your experience there that you liked the most?
I was in a fraternity. We had parties on Thursdays and Saturdays nights. I think that was probably my favorite.
Okay.
I enjoyed the battlefields. I was always interested in history.
Did you walk through those battlefields?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. I still try to go down there once or twice a year just to look at them.
Now, were you able to pick up any history that you were not taught originally from going to those battlefields? Like just looking at the hills or the landscape? Were you able to look at like some of the actions of the generals a little bit differently being down there?
Well, I think when you're on the ground looking at it, you understand the perspectives of the different combatants.
Yeah.
And also some of the mistakes that were made.
Yeah, you had 53,000 casualties, 28,000 for the Union, and another 25,000 for the Confederates. So it's a huge historical area itself.
I met a fella down there whose, I think, grandfather, the fellow must have been in his 80s or early 90s, and his grandfather had found a sniper rifle by Devil's Den.
Wow.
And that sort of brought it together for me. That rifle was in the museum there.
Now, being a history major at Gettysburg, which is almost like the pinnacle of Civil War history, did your professors or did the college expect you to kind of go out on like any Civil War tours, or did they want you to go to some of the places that were very local?
At that point, I'd have to say no. I think after I graduated, they started focusing on, I believe a couple of courses started focusing on the battle itself.
Okay.
But at the time I was there, I took multiple courses pertaining to the Civil War and Reconstruction, but there was no specific course pertaining to Gettysburg.
Okay. Now you leave Gettysburg, you take a little time, you're painting fire hydrants, and you're taking a look at something that's a little bit of a different type of job. You meet some good people. Where do you end up going after that?
Case Western Reserve Law School in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay. What was you major in the law, but what aspect of the law did you find interest in, or did you want to be able to do?
I ended up taking a lot of jurisdictional courses. I was interested in litigation, and that's what I ended up doing.
Now, where is that college located near?
It's Case Western Reserve it's in Cleveland, Ohio.
In Cleveland? Okay. You ever find yourself going back there?
I haven't been back there. I haven't been back to law school.
Okay.
I'm in touch with a couple of buddies from law school.
Okay.
But I haven't been back.
What year did you graduate from there?
88.
88. Wow. So you've been practicing law for a long, long time. And now, how does the law career kind of help you with your position as mayor of Shoreham Village?
Well, I think I'm familiar with liability issues and municipal law issues, so that's a big help.
And there's a lot that goes into, right, running a township.
Well, luckily, I have great trustees, great commissioners, and a great professional staff. I don't get paid.
Yeah.
None of us get paid. We have our clerk, treasurer, and a couple others do get paid, but the commissioners, the trustees, the mayor, the deputy mayor, we don't get paid.
So it's more like a labor of love. You're a community guy. This is where you kind of grew up. You've been there for a long time.
That's it. I've always liked public service. I like helping. I like seeing people have fun, and I enjoy being part of the community.
And it's a great area too. It's a beautiful place to be. So now, I visited your house before. I've been down in your office. What do you have that you've collected for many, many years now?
I think in 1967, my dad gave me a British World War II helmet. And thereafter, I got an American World War II helmet and then a French helmet. And I got very interested in the different shapes of helmets. I remember my parents taking me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Arms and Armor section. I was mesmerized by the different styles of arms and armor, and I ended up collecting helmets, mostly steel helmets.
So now, what would be like the oldest helmet that you have right now out of your collection? I mean, how many helmets do you have?
Probably 400.
And out of those 400 helmets, what would be, the oldest one that you have?
Probably 1915.
Wow.
A British Brodie helmet. When the First World War broke out, the Germans had those Pickelhaube, the spiked helmets, but there was no real modern combat helmet.
Okay.
When World War I broke out. But by the end of the war, a lot of countries were manufacturing their own helmets, different shapes, different sizes.
Now, you have this huge collection. What part of your collection do you have like the majority of your helmets? Like what country or what year or what war?
Mostly United States, I probably have maybe 50.
Wow.
Helmets. I have Chinese helmets, Romanian, Bulgarian, Iraqi, probably Egyptian. I mean, just about any country you can name, I have a representative sample.
So you've seen
helmet.
Quite the transformation of American helmets from years ago to that of today.
Yeah, I have a bunch of the prototypes too.
Wow.
Which might be an interesting podcast at some point.
Yeah, sure.
Interestingly, when World War I broke out, the British developed the Brodie helmet, that round-looking thing.
Yeah.
The Americans ended up adopting that style, but they realized the inadequacies of the helmet, so they went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to Bashford Dean, who was the Arms and Armor curator, and he helped design prototype helmets.
Now, what do you notice with the helmets itself? Is it kind of similar to weapons, where they're going based off the last war and the technology that they kind of knew? And does it change pretty quickly?
I really haven't thought of it. I mean, if you look at helmets generally, at times they were made in multiple pieces, like a French World War I helmet. It would have 4 pieces. By World War II, it was 2 pieces.
Wow.
Also, as far as securing chin straps and liners and things like that, I've noticed that that's changed too. Like the suspension systems had changed. Because it's not only the shell to prevent penetration, but it's also to prevent blunt force trauma against the skull.
I would think, like, in terms of the fighting and the technology, that the governments, they kind of see what works and doesn't work, and they kind of go with it a little bit, right? They have to start becoming more progressive with taking care of the needs for their soldiers, right?
Yeah, it's a good point, because if you look at the helmets of World War I and World War II and the Cold War, the helmets all were very different. Now a lot of the helmets really look the same. It's almost that Germanic 1930s, 1940s style, like the Kevlars that you wore.
Sure, yeah.
Now they all have that same shape.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you could make a helmet that would cover the entire head and cover your face so you couldn't see and you couldn't hear, and it might be more protective, but you have to balance all these different factors: hearing, vision,
Yeah, I remember
weight.
The helmet that I had in the military. It was big, it was bulky, it wasn't comfortable. It was either too loose or too tight. And it was just like one of those things. You're like, you couldn't really win with it,
Yeah.
But it was end of the Cold War, and the government wasn't looking really to make too many changes because the Cold War was over. They had a surplus of this stuff, and they were looking at different goals within society, like with Clinton trying to balance the budget and stuff like that. So,
And you were wearing the Kevlar?
I was wearing the Kevlar there.
Yeah. With my collection, there are too many man-made fiber helmets, so I really stopped with steel helmets, which ended, probably 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Do you keep an eye on the helmets, especially those from the War on Terror over the last so many years?
I really haven't. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the United States helmets, the more recent models, but they're just too many.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of them, they look the same to me. So
sure.
You hand me a Canadian or Australian, I don't think, or German, I probably couldn't tell you the difference.
Yeah. And it's a tough spot because every government looks at things differently. They have different goals, and what they can and cannot produce is different. So there's so much that is out there. So I'm going to give you one of the helmets that you brought down here today. The people at home will be able to see a very, very strong collection of helmets, and this is just like the tip of the iceberg. All right, so here's the first helmet.
We're talking about in connection with Normandy.
With Normandy, which is important because if you want to hold that up, we just had 81st anniversary of Normandy, and that's kind of like the direction that we'll head into when it comes to looking at some of the helmets that you brought down here today.
This is what's called a M3 flak helmet. These were used by the bomber crews during the Second World War. There were at least 4 different versions of helmets similar to this made. What's interesting about this is it has ear flaps, so you'd put a flight helmet underneath it with communications equipment. And what I find really interesting about it is it has sort of a bit of a fuzzy feeling. And the reason for that fuzzy feeling is so if somebody touched the helmet with their bare hands and they were at that altitude where it was below freezing, their skin wouldn't stick to the helmet. There were approximately, I'm not sure exactly how many of these were made. I think it was a couple 100,000, 200,000. I've had this for years. So I imagine during D-Day when they dropped the bombs, there were crew members manning their machine guns in the aircraft wearing helmets that look just like this.
And that helmet there, for the people at home, was very important in terms of with Eisenhower, because he fought for control of how the air war was going to be covered in order to support the Normandy operation. So these guys were in the air for months before June 6, 1944, before the landings, to soften up the German resistance, go against their transportation and communication, and also their manufacturing that was coming back, towards the beaches at Normandy. Now, how heavy would that helmet be?
I don't think any more than 3 pounds. What do you think?
Yeah, it's got a little weight to it, but it's not too bad.
You know, I think it's interesting that you think about these bomber crews that they were wearing like flak, body armor.
Yeah.
Where the infantry guys really weren't during the Second World War. I mean, during your generation, you guys were wearing body armor.
Sure.
Flak jackets, sappy plates.
And up until like the Battle of the Bulge, a lot of the prisoners of war itself were the air crews.
Yeah.
The bombers that were going up night and day. And like I said before, Eisenhower wanted direct control, and he kind of got in a fight with Churchill over it. And, he kind of came out and said, I'm willing to quit from this position if I don't get control of the air. So these bomber crews went up there and they softened everything in the western part of France. And they still went into the German interior and places like Politz and Peenemünde and the Ruhr to go after a lot of the German productivity and weapons.
How many flights did they have to do before they were given a reprieve?
It changed. It went from 25 to 30 and then 35. And then you get guys like Jimmy Doolittle, who's going to come out and say, Spat's going to come out and say, well, we're losing our best air crews, the most experienced. So then it kept going up in intervals. The movie Memphis Belle, which is one of those guys, D.B. Sweeney is a Shoreham resident, and
graduated in 79.
Yeah, he didn't think he was going to survive. And so it definitely went up from that point. So, all right, let me give you another helmet here.
This was given to me by one of my buddy's relatives. It's a flight helmet, A11. It has communications. It was used by pilots during the Second World War and Korea, and I believe others. And interestingly, it says Army Air Force. I don't know if you can really zero in on it.
Yeah, which the Air Force doesn't become its own component until about, I believe it was 1947.
Yep.
Somewhere right around that time.
It's sort of a neat helmet. The fellow who gave it to me had worn it during the 50s. And it was very nice of him.
Now, what's around his ears?
Here?
Yes.
Just earphones.
So they can communicate with each other?
Yep.
And then what is that, a pin? That's just
I'm not
above
sure
his...
what that says. It might be from Strategic Air Command. I don't know, maybe you can read
Sure.
it. I'm not sure. It was definitely, he definitely had that helmet post-war. My understanding is they adopted a helmet that was like that in 1943, and they continued utilizing it through the 50s.
Now, with that material, was there any additional casualties, or did guys get hurt from that material? Because it seems very, very thin.
Yeah, I don't think it affords any ballistic protection whatsoever, no more than a jacket. It wasn't made to protect your head. It was probably to keep your head a little bit warm and to keep the communications equipment next to your ears.
Probably a little bit more comfortable too, right? Yep. In terms of having this big thing on your head where...
I believe you could wear an oxygen mask with it, and also you'd have goggles, and the back of the helmet has these little, the flight helmet has these little leather things you can stick the goggle rear through.
Who would have been most likely to wear that?
I imagine pilots. I'm thinking maybe the guys manning the guns would put something like that underneath that helmet that I just showed you with the flaps.
Like a navigator, a bomber, right?
Or maybe even the guys who are manning the machine guns in the aircraft.
It's something. Somebody wore that.
It's funny. I have so many of these things that I have an understanding as to what they were used for, but you start asking me enough questions, I'm not going to know the.
Oh, it's impossible.
I'm not going to know the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding, it's an A11. There were multiple variants of that helmet made.
Sure.
They were definitely utilized by pilots, by the navigators, by the guys actually operating the aircraft. The guys in the back of the aircraft were wearing those A11. The flak helmets, of which there were multiple types as well.
And then you got B-17, B-24, B-29 bombers. I mean, it's amazing the amount that was produced for all that aircraft, especially here on Long Island.
Yeah.
A lot of planes that were built here, were used against the Japanese. So now here's your next helmet.
This is This is probably my largest helmet. It's not particularly heavy, but it's large. It's a U.S. Navy Mark II telephone talker helmet. And this helmet was used on ships. So where's the communications gear? So if you look at the guys on the decks of the ships during in the Pacific campaign, you'll see them wearing these helmets and attacking or responding to the kamikazes coming in, utilizing helmets like this with the communications equipment that was underneath the helmet. So this is a little bit unusual in that when I got this set, they sent me the communications gear, the headphones, and the microphone. So this would go over your neck. You'd have speaking to this. You'd listen here, and hopefully things went well for you. But this type helmet was used, I believe, up through Vietnam, and it has a sort of an unusual lining system. This is sort of mushed, this one, but it fits pretty tightly in your head. It's not adjustable. And there it says USN for U.S. Navy, and that's sort of interesting. It has the leather, it's like a leather strap, and these things have a little bit of, I believe, a little bit of give. It's just an unusual helmet. These have been completely replaced by something made out of probably Kevlar or some other man-made fiber.
Now, who would have most likely had worn that within the Navy? Landing crafts, guys running the vessels, stuff of that nature? I think
it was guys who were probably running the gun crews.
Yeah.
I have one that is painted red that somebody gave me years ago, and it was used by the firemen on the ship. And I have another one which has an eagle, globe, and anchor on the front, the Marine Corps emblem. And I was thinking perhaps the Marine Corps had maybe forward controllers on the beach communicating with the Navy for naval gunfire.
Wow.
But I'm not sure. I've never seen a photograph of a helmet like this with a EGA, but it looks to me to be completely legitimate.
You know who might have wore this? Is two baseball players that come to mind. One is Bob Feller, who could have taken a baseball and put it right through this wall. He was in destroyer duty in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. And then Yogi Berra, who was at the invasion of Normandy. And then he said southern France was worse, even though it was a fraction of the size of Normandy, because he said that he realized they were trying to kill him. The first invasion you don't know, the second invasion you do know. And Bob Feller, there's a picture of him wearing this helmet here.
Oh, really? That's neat.
And then he gets out of the Navy in 1945, and he's in Cleveland in 1946, and they call him a hero. And he goes, "I'm no hero, I'm a survivor." And he ends up winning the Cy Young Award for baseball. And then Yogi basically comes in off the street and goes to Yankee Stadium, still in his naval uniform. And I believe he was pulling like dead bodies out of the surf and stuff like that. And he was helping run those like rocket boats where they were flying the artillery ashore. They were like the smaller rockets itself to help like with the landing craft. And, those are some big, cumbersome, it almost looks like something out of like a Star Wars or something like that, right? That you would see, and it's pretty amazing. And then the communications, today everything's LOL and, right, and cell phones and everything else. But this communication still worked between, right, some of the landing craft and going back to the main vessels and stuff along those lines. So even though the technology is almost somewhat primitive, right, it still worked and it still did the job.
The photo you saw, where was the fellow? Was he on a ship or on
Bob Feller was on a ship there, yeah. And he got an exemption for being a farmer, and he ended up going in and he gave away like probably 3 or 4 years of his prime. And the next year, he ends up becoming like the best baseball player in America in terms of pitching wise. That was amazing.
It's a great story.
It's a great story, right? And then Yogi, always had that look to him, short, stocky guy, Midwestern. He's from St. Louis. And you think of Yogi with the World Series and winning and Mantle and Maris and Whitey Ford. but you also think of Yogi with the military too, and him being proud of the Navy, which is in his museum in Montclair, New Jersey. All right, so we're going to take a little break here with Tom Spier. We're going to continue to take a look at his amazing helmet collection, and we're going to still delve into the American helmets that would have most likely been used at Normandy on June 6, 1944.